Do the Dallas Cowboys have the best cornerback duo in the NFL going into the 2023 season? All that and more this episode of Locked On Cowboys podcast.
You are Locked On Cowboys, your
Locked
daily Dallas Cowboys podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
On. Locked on. Locked on Cowboys.
Welcome back to the Locked On Cowboys podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. We'd like to thank you for making us your first listen of the day. Today's episode is brought to you by LinkedIn. LinkedIn Jobs helps you find the qualified candidates that you want to talk to faster. Post your job for free at linkedin.com/LockedOnNFL. That is linkedin.com/LockedOnNFL to post your job for free. Terms and conditions apply. I am Marcus Mosher. You can follow me on Twitter at Marcus_Mosher. Joining me today, as always, is Landon McCool. You can check him out on Twitter at McCoolBCB. We are previewing the Cowboys cornerback position going into the 2023 season. And Landon, let's start with this. Do the Dallas Cowboys have the best cornerback duo in Trevon Diggs and Stephon Gilmore going into the season?
I certainly think they have every right to be in the conversation. I think Gilmore and Diggs, it's funny, as we've kind of gone through the offseason, we've kind of talked about strengths and weaknesses of this defense. I've really struggled to kind of see where I place these two guys. I think we see as individuals, right? Like, because I see Gilmore kind of as, reaching the end of his career, but still playing at an extremely high level. And then Diggs kind of ascending to that, level of accelerated play after obviously an incredible season 2 years ago on interceptions. I think he actually played better football last season, despite not having clearly the same interception total. Just his floor was a lot higher. So I think when you compare them separately, it's tough to compare. But I think when you add them together and you discuss, as a duo, there's only a couple other groups out there that I think have similarly talented guys, and I think specifically in the situation where you have a guy that you don't necessarily want to throw out at Gilmore, but you have someone who's exceptionally dangerous as the alternate person to throw at, in Diggs. Like, I think the fact that you're going to have to be forced to throw at Diggs or Gilmore is going to leave the quarterbacks with a lot of poor options, and ultimately come down to who else might be covered, and if the nickelback can play up to the same level as the guys on the outside.
There's some really good duos in the league with James Bradbury and Darius Slay, or Xavier Howard and Jalen Ramsey. But I'm not sure there's a duo that fits better than Gilmore and Diggs, right? Like, Diggs, I mean, we know he's, I think, the best ball hawk in the league, and that's why he can have an 11 interception season. And then you have Gilmore, who is just the super savvy, Mr. Consistent. You know what you're getting, kind of every single game on every single play. Together, it's like, okay, if you're an opposing quarterback, do I target the guy that could be, take it to the house on any play on a pick six, or do I target the other guy who I know is going to be covered, really, really well? I don't want to get too optimistic here because, I like to be the wet blanket here a little bit, but it's hard not to be really excited about this pairing.
Well, I mean, yeah, and I think that, what I think I was kind of struggling to say before is that I think the thing that you could really, that really accentuates the situation is that Diggs was someone previously that, could be worked around. I mean, it was annoying that you didn't want to throw his side, but you could always go to another spot of the field, or you could, try to move around your best receiver. And up until last year, when he did do a little bit of traveling, but he really mostly stayed kind of onto his side, and teams could actually kind of work around it a little bit. But now that you've got another guy on the opposite side, like, you have two bad choices, so I think it's really going to accentuate what Diggs does best, which is, playing the football at a high level of targeting. Like, when he was being thrown at a lot, he got more opportunities to get his hands on the football. I think teams just decided not to throw his way and see what the Cowboys had at other corners. That's not an option anymore. So it could make Diggs even more dangerous than like he was last year, despite being a better player than he was the year previous to that.
You and I are both very optimistic that this pairing is going to work out, fantastically for the Cowboys. But if it doesn't, where where could they be exposed? What's the downside to the Gilmore Diggs pairing?
Well, I mean, again, like I think that Diggs can still be a variance player. So if they're breaking on everything and you just see them getting burnt, or if Gilmore's loses a step in the offseason for some reason due to injury or whatever,
That's my fear. It's like whenever you're talking about corners that get over the age of 30, and I think
yeah,
he's 32, 33 now, like it can happen fast. I think
yeah,
that's my biggest concern is because
absolutely,
I don't worry about Diggs. Like I think for the most part, we kind of know what Diggs is,
yeah, totally.
but it's just when does that kind of cliff happen for Gilmore?
Yeah, and the Cowboys have insulated themselves a little bit with some of the depth they have in the roster. You hope. I mean, they need to see some of these non-roster guys kind of take a step. We'll talk about obviously, Bland as well, but I do think that they've set themselves up for a situation where I don't feel like they expect to have Gilmore much longer than this year or next year.
I
And
would
and
think
and
so.
yeah, and I think that this all is pointing towards, hey, Gilmore is a very nice, very plus replacement, but we're also going to be setting up the guys for the future once he's gone.
Well, and it feels like the last couple of years when Gilmore's played, he's been the number one cornerback for the
Hmm.
Patriots, for Carolina, for Indianapolis. Now, the idea is you're kind of shifting him into a number two role. I know it doesn't really work that way. You have two starting cornerbacks, whether
Yeah,
you call them a one or a two doesn't really matter, but he's probably going to see more safety help this year than maybe ever before, or he'll just see easier assignments. Maybe he's the guy that's going to be going up against the number two receivers, and it's going to be Diggs with safety help. I just think this is a very advantageous spot for Gilmore. Even if he
yeah.
happens to lose a step, I don't think he's going to be on an island as much as he's used to being.
His job's easier. His
Yeah.
job is a lot easier this year than it was last few years because he's not being asked to do as much to be the hero of the defense. They're just, yeah, and like you said, his assignments are going to be not more straightforward, but maybe easier to
A little less
execute because he's going
challenging,
to have
right?
help. Yeah, exactly. So they're not asking him to be on an island, by himself against the best receiver for 60 snaps a game. Like they'll mix it up. He'll get opportunities to go, play the wide receiver too, or get some safety help. So yeah, I do think that there is the concern that an older corner is going to fall off the cliff, but you're right. A lot of that is mitigated by the fact that the assignments that he's being asked to execute are
Yeah.
much easier for him.
The last thing on this duo before we move on, I'm not ruling out the possibility that we haven't seen Trevon Diggs' best football yet because you've
Sure.
got to remember he's only played, he's going into year 4 of his NFL career. He was only a cornerback in college
Yeah.
for a year and a half, right?
Mhm.
Because he was played wide receiver earlier. His third year in the NFL, third year with actually this would be a fourth year in the NFL, third year with the same defensive coordinator. Now he's got a veteran that can really help him. They, Diggs was kind of, with him and Anthony Brown, one of the two veterans in this, cornerback room last year. Maybe
Mhm.
we just see a 5% better Trevon Diggs this year. And if that's the case, the secondary is going to be absolutely awesome.
Yeah, absolutely, and I think it's certainly possible. We saw him play better overall football last year. So, and I think you just laid it out. He doesn't have a ton of experience playing corner. He's still learning a lot of it. So, yeah, I definitely think that there's still room to grow there. And I also think that the teams are going to be forced to kind of have to face Diggs in a way that they didn't have to
Absolutely.
last year, and that's going to give him more opportunities for him to do what he does best, and that's go get the football while it's in the air.
So if Trevon Diggs is playing on the outside and Stephon Gilmore is playing on the outside, who's playing in the slot for the Dallas Cowboys? We get to that next. This episode is brought to you by LinkedIn. These days, every new potential hire can feel like a high stakes wager for your small business. You want to be 100% certain that you have access to the best qualified candidates available. That's why you have to check out LinkedIn Jobs. LinkedIn Jobs helps you find the right people for your team faster and for free. It's so easy to post a job. You put it up, you add your job, and then you add the purple hashtag hiring frame to your LinkedIn profile to spread the word that you're hiring. Simple tools like screening questions make it easy to focus on candidates with just the right skills and experience so you can quickly prioritize who you'd like to interview and hire. It's why small businesses rate LinkedIn Jobs #1 in delivering quality hires versus leading competitors. LinkedIn Jobs helps you find the qualified candidates that you want to talk to faster. Post your job for free at linkedin.com/LockedOnNFL. That is linkedin.com/LockedOnNFL to post your job for free. Terms and conditions apply. Welcome back to the Locked On Cowboys podcast. We are previewing the cornerback position for the Dallas Cowboys going into the 2023 season. We know Stephon Gilmore and Trevon Diggs are starting on the outside, but Landon, who's going to start in the slot for the Cowboys this year?
Well, I mean, not to steal from the great Babe Laufenberg, but who's available to play? Because I think that's going to be a huge part of this, right? And I think the big question, obviously, is what is the short term and I guess long term being this season and the health of Jordan Lewis, right? And his Liz Frank injury that I'm pretty sure that he's dealing with right now. So it's a terrible injury. I think we've dealt with it with a lot of former Cowboys that just kind of never came back playing the same at similar type positions. So the question is how bad is Jordan Lewis's and how much is it going to limit him? Because if he's available and healthy, I think there's a nice little competition between him and Duron Bland. I think potentially with the idea that they'll probably share the role. And then, as the season goes on, I wouldn't be surprised if Bland kind of exclusively took that a little bit. But I also think that there is something, to the idea that maybe they want Lewis to come back healthy because they would like to get Bland on track to be ready to play on the outside as the eventual successor for Stephon Gilmore. So, and I think that that's part of the reason that you're going to see, and you have seen Kelvin Joseph in the slot and an opportunity for him to kind of make a move there. And frankly, I hope that he kind of I hope that he develops himself to the point where he is putting himself into this conversation because I think he has a natural skill set for this. I think it's a good fit. But I think we have to learn to trust the guy. And that's been an issue for his kind of up and down consistency. So, I just threw out 3 names, and that doesn't even include, all the safeties that are going to eventually play there. Curse will play in their
Don't worry, I didn't forget about
I'm
those
sure
guys.
we'll talk about that. So, but I mean, I guess the point is that there's going to be a lot of names thrown here. So I think at the end of the day, a lot of people will end up playing in the slot.
I can just envision people listening to this podcast right now or on YouTube and thinking, okay, why not just play Duron Bland there? He had 5 interceptions as a rookie. He's the future. It's clear that he can play. He kind of saved the season last year.
Yeah.
Why even mess around trying to use Kelvin Joseph and Israel Makamo and Jordan Lewis? Why not just stick Bland on the field and let him go because he's a playmaker?
I think the answer to that is because you may want him for more than just the slot role. You may want him to develop some outside skills as well. And because, like I just mentioned before, when we were talking about Gilmore, they don't know when the wheels are going to fall off on Gilmore. And beyond that too, like what happens if there's just an injury? Who's the first person on the outside that you want playing on the outside? I want it to be Duron Bland because Duron Bland's the best corner to play. So
yeah,
I think that they need to get Duron Bland ready to be to play in the slot, absolutely. But they also need to be kind of splitting his slot, his snaps up a little bit outside too, because if someone gets hurt, if either Gilmore or Diggs is off the field, I want Duron Bland as the guy out there replacing him.
The question I had to ask at the beginning of the segment is who's playing in the slot? And the answer might just be who's playing in the slot for the opponent, right? Because if you're playing somebody that's playing one of these power slots, the 6'3", 220-pound slot guy, Jordan Lewis is not a big guy, right? Duron Bland has some size. Kelvin Joseph has some size. He's not particularly long, but maybe that's where you want to Israel Makamo playing in the slot, right? Somebody who's a little bit bigger, longer, more athletic. But if you're playing, or they play the Jets in week 2, what if it's Randall Cobb?
Yeah.
That's a situation where I might actually want Jordan Lewis. You get somebody who's a little bit more of a veteran that kind of knows some of the crafty stuff in there.
Savvy.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It might just depend on what the slot receiver looks like on the other side.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that is the true answer. I mean, if the question is who's going to be playing the slot, the answer is a lot of folks, including Micah Parsons at times. Like I said, several safeties will play there. I bet other linebackers will kind of step out and cover folks in the slot. So I think if you're asking who the third corner is, who the nickel corner is on most sit downs, I think that we're going to find out in a battle, and it will likely be, one of Jordan Lewis or Duron Bland, or potentially if, things go really crazy, Kelvin Joseph.
So we know that Diggs, Gilmore, and Bland are all locks to make the roster. After those top three, it can get a little wild, right? Because they have Nashawn Wright, there is Kelvin Joseph, there's Jordan Lewis. Do you think there is a spot on the roster for both Jordan Lewis and Kelvin Joseph if those guys are basically going to be slot only players?
I think it helps. Certainly helps Kelvin Joseph that he is, a huge special teams player. So I think if given the choice between the two, and they're playing similarly at slot, then I think there's a good chance that Jordan Lewis and his whatever 2 million. I can't remember what his
5
cap
million.
hit is.
It's 5
5
million.
million. Sorry, $5 million cap hit likely goes out the window, or they trade him to somebody, right? I think that there's going to be a lot of changes in the kind of special teams room. So if they find a way to kind of have some other kind of players at unexpected spots play some special teams, maybe they could fit both of those guys in. But I have a hard time believing that if they're going to keep an Eric Scott, if they're going to keep some of these other guys that they've kind of picked up along the ways, or that they're still trying to work out with, with the
or
general
they just call Israel Makamo a corner, right? Because
yeah.
we're going to talk about safety later in this week. We know that their top three safeties, Malik Hooker, Donovan Wilson, Jaron Kearse, are on the team. They really like Marquise Bell, who was on the roster all year last year, and obviously Makamo is going to make it. Are they going to keep 5 safeties, or do they go a little bit longer at safety, call Makamo a corner, and maybe that factors in this as well? I don't know.
Yeah, or just whether they call him a corner or not, just that like if he's going to be your fourth backup at slot or whatever, then maybe that eliminates the need for a Jordan Lewis as your third guy, right?
Well, the way that I look at it is, I think they're going to keep 10 defensive backs, right? So if you go 5 safeties, call Makamo a safety, and you go 5 corners, it gets crowded really quickly after your top 3. That means Jordan Lewis, Kelvin Joseph, Nashawn Wright, Eric Scott, Miles Brooks. Like, there's a lot of guys competing for 2 spots.
Yeah, I mean, you're definitely gonna, unless you're planning on going short at linebacker, but then like you're talking about running out into special teams problems, unless you've got a plan there. So I'm sure we'll do entire podcasts on roster management and team building, but I do think it's a good question. Like, Jordan Lewis is in kind of a precarious position because he needs to be significantly better than all the other nickel backs, I think, in order
to just dominate that. Like, there just needs to be such a gap between him and every other slot corner on this team.
And the fact is that he's, and that's why it's really not great news that he's still dealing with his injuries, in the offseason. I mean, I don't think it's necessarily unexpected, but I do think it makes this situation very difficult because he's not going to get necessarily a full opportunity, but you don't necessarily just want to cut him outright without him giving him an opportunity once he's healthy. So it is kind of a tough situation the Cowboys are going to have to navigate.
Well, let's not forget our guy CJ Goodwin, probably going to make the roster as well. I mean, they're going to call him a corner, but I mean, again, that's 11 defensive backs on a 53-man roster. That is a lot of players allocated at one position.
Unless they aren't planning on keeping Goodwin, unless they've decided that this.
Oh, he'll be on the team. I'm going to be like 75 years old doing this podcast, and CJ Goodwin is still on this team.
Yeah, one of these years he's not going to make the team. It's got to happen. So I don't know that necessarily this is the year. It's the what do we say to the God of death?
Death, tax, and CJ Goodwin.
Yeah, CJ Goodwin is guaranteed. Just not today. Like, that's what he says to the cut man. Every year it seems like. Yeah.
It's going to be fascinating. That cornerback position is going to be one of the most interesting battles because there are a couple deep sleepers that you should keep an eye on, and we'll talk about those guys next. We want to thank you for making Locked On Cowboys your first listen every day. Everydayers, we are going to be off on Tuesday for the holiday. Lane and I will be back on Wednesday, though, talking about that safety position, which is going to be another really fascinating one to see how the Cowboys find different ways to get as many of these guys on the field at the same time. So be sure you tune in for that. But let's finish up with this, Landon. Is there a deep sleeper at the cornerback position that Cowboy fans should keep an eye on?
I mean, look, it's hard not to say Eric Scott at this point. I mean, I don't even know that you're going to I mean, he's a 7th round pick or whatever it was, 6th round pick, he still is hard to be called a sleeper because everybody's been talking about him.
It
Since
feels very Duron Blandy right now, right?
yeah, it really does, and that's obviously the name to be right now, the hot name to be if you're a late round Dallas Cowboys draft pick. So yeah, obviously he's a guy that they identified and felt like they wanted a specific workout tape from him, and he has not let them down. Basically he hit the ground running with an attitude and a work ethic that they felt was notable, and they've pointed out, and seriously, almost every single person that you see interviewed on the Cowboys organization on the defensive side of the ball seemingly has mentioned this kid. It's reflected in how he's practiced, in the sense that he's been working with the first team and all of those things that usually come with being a standout out of nowhere, right? You quickly get rewarded, and then you quickly either sink or swim there. So it sounds like he's kind of taken that all in and shown that he belongs. And so we're in wait and see mode. Now we're the drum beat has continued, and we just hold off until we see that kind of continues in training camp. It continues in Oxnard. If it does, then you're looking very much at a Duron Bland situation where maybe he comes in and he's part of this conversation. And someone like him is really what could make that whole conversation we had in our last segment come to fruition. Is like any of these sleeper guys who show any kind of prowess or ability to play, especially if they can play some special teams.
Yes.
They're gonna fight. They're gonna knock some veteran that is not playing special teams off this roster, and whether that's Jordan Lewis through trade or through cut, I don't know. But I think that the quickest way for those kind of situations to kind of get to a boiling point is downward pressure coming up from someone that you didn't expect to make the roster, that has really shown out and shown you that they have a future.
If you follow Eric Galco on Twitter, he is the director of the Shrine Game, which has recently moved to the Star, but it was out in Las Vegas last year. He's been talking about that the key thought that the Cowboys got the 2 best cornerbacks from the Shrine practices, Eric Scott Jr. and Miles Brooks, a kid they signed as an undrafted free agent from La Tech, in this draft. And maybe we'll have to have Eric Galco on this summer to talk about some of those players, but he thought both of those guys could easily make 53-man rosters this year. I think Scott has a great chance because you mentioned it, the special teams ability. Miles Brooks has never really played special teams, so that's a little bit harder of a climb. But I won't be shocked at all if this is, man, what year was it where the Cowboys got Chavarius Ward and Donovan Alumba in the same offseason? And obviously Ward has had a much better career, but those were 2 undrafted free agent guys stuck around in the league for a long time.
Yeah, I think the thing that people forgot about the Ward, they get mad because Ward's gone, but it was very unusual to have 2 undrafted free agents of that quality. I mean, say what you want about Alumba, he at least got on the field and played, a couple of different seasons. So that's pretty rare.
Was different teams. He was in Cleveland, I think, last year even. So to find NFL quality corners without having to spend a draft pick is rare.
It's crazy. So to find 2 of those guys, one team to have 2 of those guys was very, very crazy. And I'm sure it made the Cowboys' decision-making very difficult. And it made it very difficult because of this exact situation, right? Like you don't necessarily account on your roster, kind of your pre-season roster, game day roster. You're just throwing things at the wall. You kind of have an idea of what you're going to get. But suddenly if this happens, it's champagne problems, but it's still a problem, right? Like you don't know exactly, okay, well, who's the guy that we replace here? And I think Jordan Lewis, because of the injury, because of the money, because of the fact that he's not playing special teams, becomes the very easy guy to earmark as the potential guy to kind of move out, whether it be trade or through cut. But I also would submit that Jordan Lewis is also a very good football player, and if he's healthy, is the best choice potentially to play in that slot. So I think it's worth examining. And like I said, champagne problems are still problems for the Cowboys.
I just think about how we were looking at this position last year, right? Kelvin Joseph came off a rookie year where he didn't play, right? Yeah. Nahshon Wright really didn't play at all. Those guys are way down the roster now. You were relying on Jordan Lewis. You had no idea about Duron Bland. Anthony Brown was one of your starting outside corners. And to have this kind of depth in competition where, there's a real chance that you have a second, third round pick not make your roster because you've got just guys that are better behind them or ahead of them, right? So this cornerback spot is going to be the one in training camp in the preseason that I am so excited to see, because I think we're going to get a good idea pretty quickly where everybody's going to slot in.
This is why slot in. I like that. This is why this is why the Cowboys are such a good drafting team. Is that it's not just that they're good at drafting, but they're good at insulating themselves if their draft picks don't hit. They scout all these guys very well, and so they get these opportunities to get these late round undrafted free agents who actually contribute to the team. So that hey. Oh, it's not a big deal if that's your second round corner isn't playing at a second round corner expected level right now, because you got a 6th round guy from Fresno was able to step in and play very high level in playoff games last year. So I think that that kind of tradition will continue, and if Joseph doesn't step up, he's another guy that likely could get bumped off the roster, especially if someone like Eric Scott comes in and shows that he can play on the outside. That would allow you the opportunity to have more Bland inside, and that might spell the end for both Lewis and Joseph.
The Cowboys they do a pretty good job of throwing numbers at really important positions where you need depth, right? Like the amount of talent that they've kind of just stacked up at this cornerback position is really incredible,
right? It's like you spend a high round pick, you spend like a mid round, and then you get some undrafted free agents, and just lots of opportunities, right?
And that's the advantage of bringing in, whether you want to call Stephon Gilmore a star at this stage of his career, a Pro Bowl level player, is it just knocks everybody down a little bit. And now they can fill in roles that they're more suited to play, right? Duron Bland as the number 3 outside corner is perfect right now. Now, maybe next year he'll be ready to take the number 2 job. Maybe he's ready this year, but you're not necessarily relying on him to do that, which is absolutely
and maybe you will. Maybe you will by the end of the year when Gilmore gets hurt, you need him. And then guess what? You've got that guy to step in and play at that high level. And that's, again, it's a long season. So you've got to have more than just the starters on this team if you want to play good football throughout the year.
Well, and last year is a perfect example. By the time you got to week 14, 15, you were having to sign guys off the street like Trayvon Mullen and Xavier Woods just to get you to the playoffs. Hopefully that's not the case for the Cowboys this year. That is it for today's show. We want to thank you for making Locked On Cowboys your first listen of the day. Again, we're going to be off for the 4th, so we're going to enjoy the holiday. We'll be back on Wednesday with more Locked On Cowboys content. We are free and available on all platforms. Check out the show on YouTube. Follow Landon on Twitter at McCoolBCB. I'm at Marcus_Mosher, and we'll see you next time.